Hi, everybody. This is Al Spath. I'm coming to you on Positive Poker Insiders, and today's guest is coming from Amsterdam, and it's Rolf Slotboom. How are you, Rolf?
How are you, Al?
I'm
Nice,
very
nice talking
good.
to
We
you.
haven't
Long
talked.
time.
We haven't
Yeah.
talked in quite a while. It's been back in the days at Poker School Online, and I miss those days. And everything has changed in the world of poker. How's it changed for you?
Actually, a lot has changed. Obviously, for years I was very active as a player. For years I was like very active as a writer, as a poker school online teacher, active for poker pages, active for card players, stuff like that. Of course, doing lots with my books. And nowadays I don't play that much at all anymore. So I've basically moved into new endeavors. So yeah.
New endeavors. Well, look at some of those books. Secrets of Pot Limit Omaha, Secrets of Shorthanded Pot Limit Omaha, Secrets of Professional Poker, and more. You still selling those on Amazon? Can people still get those books for themselves?
Actually, they can, and I think like 2 years ago, it was also offered as an ebook. I don't know why, but people still want to read it, so they still buy it. Obviously, the first book, I was like very proud when it came out, because it was the first book on how to beat like at least in my opinion, it was like the first book to beat full ring pot limit Omaha games with like a very different approach. I was very proud when I published it that people were like outraged because the book came out. It was basically a one-on-one on how to short stack and capitalize on the over-aggressive play of some of the opponents. I know like many, yeah, many especially young guys, they followed it like religion.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so basically I was like very proud of that because it was a book that definitely had added value for players. Obviously, it wasn't always good for poker as a whole. Why? Because I recommended that people like play so tight and just wait, and then push. It wasn't like really. It wasn't the best for the overall health of the games, obviously. However, to make money in the short run, it was like perfect. There was also like some other stuff to that book. There was also like big stack play and stuff like that, especially for full ring. And later on, I published together with Rob Holling, the short-handed book, the
Yes.
short-handed PLO book, and I like that a lot too. So yes, I'm very proud that those books did so well, and added something to it wasn't just like a book that was two
Value.
books that were just like nice to read,
It was
but
value,
it was
yes,
like
very, very,
really
very,
helping the
very
players.
much
Yeah, yeah,
added value. One of our listeners today is Mark Curry from the Odds and Outs. He has a Twitch page, and he's a big PLO fan of yours. He read all your books and everything, and he sent me this question the other day, which I sent to you, but I did it wrong because he corrected me afterwards.
yeah.
He said Rolf killed the full ring games. That
Mhm.
book, the shorthanded, killed the ring. Everybody went to shorthanded. After you wrote the book, it was like you can't find a full table anymore. You had to go to shorthanded if you wanted to play. He said it was so dramatic. It made such a big difference in the world of PLO that people in years to come will be talking about how you influenced the game that much.
Well, in one way, that's very kind. I believe there is some truth to that. However, I also believe that the progress towards short-handed play would have happened anyway. This just happened to speed up the process a little bit.
You were the
Um,
accelerant, huh?
yeah, sure. What was the reason why this system, if you will, was so successful? Because people who were like over aggressive, say the bullies, the hyper aggressive players, they
Right.
had no other option but to play a full ring game that didn't really suit their abilities. So by simply capitalizing on those mistakes, one could like make a lot of money, and it was just common sense that they would want some other type of game that would suit their abilities better, which
Mm-hmm.
is like either six max or even heads up games. My guess was this would have happened anyway, and also the online casinos, they started noticing that if they offered like short-handed games, they could charge just as much rake as playing a full ring game. However, it was like a rake for like 6 players rather than 9.
More money.
And I always said, hey, players, if it becomes short-handed, make sure that the rake gets lower because now it's proportionally higher because it's the rake is for like 6 players rather than for 9. And casinos now have a genuine interest in having short games because they charge a lot of money. They
They
take a
sh-
lot of money out of the games,
they sure
which
do.
which means that players like it because they play against fewer players. They can be more active. They can play more hands, and the casinos like it because they can charge more rake. So
I
one
understand
is
it.
to
Let's take
yeah.
it back to the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in Amsterdam. I still live in the Netherlands, not in Amsterdam anymore, but still in the Netherlands. I was born in Amsterdam. I lived in Vienna for quite a while. I basically started my poker career there
Did you go to
because
school?
I was, yeah, well, I was, I was no, not that. I had the opportunity to work as a dealer in corporate card casino, which back then was Europe's biggest poker room.
Yes.
And I worked there as a dealer, and I saw firsthand the way the back then best players in Europe play poker. And I figured, hey, if I study a little bit and put my job aside, then I think I'm probably going to be better than they are right now. So I quit my job and started my poker career in Vienna. And after that, I moved back to Amsterdam, and well,
I was
it,
lucky enough to go to Amsterdam on several occasions, but
yeah,
I had a 10-day stint over at Vocal, which is the air base there.
yeah.
Um, do you know where Vocal is? VO.
No, maybe because of the pronunciation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyhow, that's where the F-10, I think it was the F-105s that they had there. We were in the Air Force. I was in the Air Force, and we came over and did some reconnaissance stuff. But it was really nice. We played soccer. I never played a game in my life. We call it football, but I never played a game in my life that after 5 minutes I was so tired running up and down that field, and I was one of those strikers, so I had to be running all over the place. I was so glad to get back. We did a big barbecue. We flew in about 400 pounds of ribs on an F4, and we had this big American 4th of July type picnic there with the ribs and everything, and every soldier there was the smiles on their face was so good because we were all part of NATO and everything, and we were allies and everything, but we got to interact with each other and learn each other's customs, and it was great. When I went for breakfast in the morning, they were having like sandwiches and stuff, and I never had that experience of a different type of meal like that in the morning. So it was really interesting, just interacting for 10 days, which is a long time, and we had a good time. And I really love your country. I love the people over there, and you should be proud of that country. It's very nice.
well, thanks for your kind words, man. Appreciate it. Yeah.
All right, back to poker. Why did you start playing PLO, or did you start with Hold'em and move over to PLO?
Actually, I did move over from Hold'em, but I was not a no limit Hold'em player. I was a limit Hold'em player.
Back in the
So
day.
one could say even worse, huh?
Yeah.
I was back then. It was lots of limit poker.
Yes.
Also because casinos, it was just live casinos back then. Obviously, no online yet. And casinos figured that limit hold'em was better to offer to their customers than no limit poker because in no limits players can get cleaned out quite easily, and in limit poker the money moves around and the house can charge for like every hand, and in the end no one really loses big time. Back then it was the only game that was offered, at least in Europe. It was just limit poker. So I started out with limit 7 card stud actually, and then limit hold'em, also limit Omaha 8 or better, and limit stud were games that, well, also in the US back then were like very popular. And then slowly but surely the bigger players in Europe, they wanted to play another game because they figured limit was too boring, and they didn't move right away to no limit hold'em, but they moved to pot limit Omaha, and it was like all the guys with lots of money, all the big gamblers, they all wanted to play pot limit Omaha, and one would be foolish not to jump on the wagon. So I figured, hey, if the gamblers want to play pot limit Omaha. What am I doing? Playing limit Hold'em. So I simply moved on. I figured, what are they doing? How can I use their mistakes? How can I exploit their mistakes? I can use it to my advantage. And in all cases, it was the same. That they just played over aggressive for a full ring game. And because I didn't have that much money back then, I was building my bankroll. This was the way to build my bankroll by playing short money and move in early and make lots of small wins. This is how we did it in Vienna. Later on in Amsterdam, we had a big game. Like 10 years ago, we played 10 euros, 10 euros pot limit Omaha, sometimes even 20 pot limit Omaha in the live game. Lots of money on the table.
Mm-hmm.
So which basically meant one pot an evening would be enough. Just make sure that on this one pot you had like the percentage in your favor.
That's
So
true.
one could play like very tight and still make a lot of money. So this is basically how I built my poker game. Obviously, like 2 or 3 years later, people started to realize what I was doing. They caught on, and I had to expand on my game too, and start building my big stack play. Start building my short-handed play. But in the beginning, it was basically waiting for this one moment that would happen, and just get the money in when I was the favorite.
Yeah, but I think that comes from your limit background. You know, you have to have patience and discipline when
Yeah.
you're playing limit poker, and I think you brought that to PLO. You weren't in a hurry. You knew you strike when you're the favorite. You did the right things there, and I think all the people in the past that were limit players that moved over to no limit are much better no limit players because of that good solid foundation they developed when they were limit players.
Yeah. However, because of the short-handed games that evolved from the full ring
Aggressiveness.
games, it's a bit different now, huh?
Yeah,
Because not just in short-handed pot limit Omaha, but also in short-handed no limit Hold'em, lots of pots are won without a showdown.
aggressive.
Back then, in my days, in full ring games, 80% of the pots went to a showdown.
That's
So
right.
you better make sure you had the best hand. And nowadays, lots of pots are won like by aggression, by good position, by the ability not just to read your opponents very well, but also to represent your own hand like very well. And it means like if 70 or 80% of pots are awarded to players without a showdown, it's a totally different ballgame.
That's true. When was your first year at the World Series of Poker, and how many trips did you make?
I think I made like six. I think the first was probably in 2006. In 2005, I happened to become Dutch poker champion. I say happened to become because I never played tournaments. I didn't like tournaments, and I happened to play that one. I won it, and then afterwards in 2006, I happened to play a big, like the biggest tournament back then in Europe, the Master Classics. I played the main event because not very interesting. I was mad at some guys because I was supposed to do like the reporting for TV, and then in the end they wanted someone else for the job, and I said, if you guys don't want me as the reporter, you'll get me as a player. So not the best reason maybe to play a 5,000 euro tournament, but that was my reasoning back then. I
How'd you
happened to do
do?
very well. I happened to do very well by playing total kamikaze poker and getting lucky, basically. But from that moment on, I started jumping. I jumped to the tournament circuit and started going to Vegas for of course, in 2007 or 2008. I don't know, remember exactly. I got sponsored, so it made it easier. Also, I didn't. The first year I did it on my own. I paid all the tournaments myself, and then later on, of course, I had a sponsor. Made it a lot and I could just relax and play good poker and play all the major tournaments back then.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Are you ever going to go back to the World Series and try your luck?
Well, no. I think like maybe 3 years ago, I played the last main event. The last two WSOPs I did were just like the main event
Right.
because back in the days when I played a lot, I said the main event is the best value in the world because there are like 7 or 8 thousand players playing,
Right.
and 3 or 4 thousand out of those players they play the same level as the $20 buy-in game you can play at your local club, at your local pub, something
That's
like that.
true.
Yeah, but it was back then, and nowadays I've noticed that the level has risen tremendously. My game hasn't gotten better in the past 5 years because I hardly ever play anymore. I'm now much more into politics and stuff like that. So you don't become a better player by not playing, and the other guys have become much better.
Well,
So
we
there would
won't
be no
talk
value
about
in golf.
American politics today because that will set you off. I'm telling you, we've got the worst races in the world going on here.
I'm not gonna judge on that. You guys know that much better than I do, I guess.
I
Yeah,
can tell you for sure. Not much choice back here. There was a question that came in about the best stack size for a six max.
yeah.
Now, I didn't understand that question, but maybe you understand what he's talking about. What's the best size to come into a game like that?
I can understand it very well because in the past, when I played a lot online, the full ring games they had like the possibility to buy in between 20 big blinds and 100 big blinds.
Okay.
So my recommendation was to either buy in for the max and
Hmm.
try to cover the table, or buy in for like 20 big blinds. So you're like very short in relation to the others and can capitalize on their over aggressive play because they have 100 big blinds. They try to get the stacks of the other 100 big blind
Okay.
players. Uh, so they open a bit more aggressively than they should because they try to break the other players, get in position where they have position on the other, and stuff like that. And you can move in with your 20 big blind stack before the flop, and it's easy. You're 7 or 8 times out of 10, you have the best hand, and even if you don't, you usually have proper odds to be involved in the hand anyway, which means positive expectation for almost every hand you play. But for short-handed, it's a bit different because if you try, back then it was the same, huh? You could also buy in for like 20 minimum and 100 max.
Yes.
But if you buy in for 20 minimum in a six max game, in a short-handed game where sometimes one or two people are walking and it's like even five or four-handed, the blinds come in much more often. And this means that you cannot wait for the proper situation so easily as you can in a full ring game. Which means that already in the book Secrets of Short-Handed Pot Limit Omaha with Rob, we came to the conclusion that 20 big blinds is not the optimal approach for if you want to play short stacked in short-handed games. 20 big blinds is not optimal, and we came to the conclusion that probably 35 or 40 is optimal for them for short-handed games. Why? Because you can move yourself into a situation where you not get all the money in before the flop, but you can get yourself in a situation where you like a three bet pot before the flop and have one pot bet behind, so you can bet that all in on the flop, which means that you can
See all the cards.
get. Yeah, well, yeah, basically, it's a strategy that allows you. Now, let me put it differently. In the full ring game, the object was always to get the money in when you had the edge,
Hmm.
and because of playing like 35 or 40 big blinds in a short-handed play, by making the proper adjustments, playing a bit more loose aggressively, actually, you can move yourself into a situation where you steal a few more pots without still risking a lot of money. And the edge is not so much that you always have the best hand when you move in, but the edge is that people sometimes now fold after the flop when you put in the last bullet,
Right.
when in reality, had they known that you're not that strong, they would have called. You try, basically what you try to do, you try to mimic the same type of strategy that you did in the full ring games, like represent aces all the time, when in reality you can have like a very wide range of hands. Eventually people will catch up
Catch
to what
on.
you're doing because they just look at your stats and they think, hey, he cannot have aces all the time, but hopefully by the time they figure that out, you have stolen a few pots already.
That's true. That guy I talked about earlier, Mark Curry from the Odds and Outs on Twitch.
Yeah.
He he was telling, I was talking to him. He said, "Do you know Ralph?" Rolf. I said, "Yeah." I said, Rolf used to stop in on my stud classes sometimes and sit down at the stud tables. We played, 50 cent $1 $2 stud, and he liked that too. That's my favorite game, 7 card stud high. But he wants to know if you ever, and I think everybody has at one time, have gone on tilt, and what do you do to prevent it if you do, or how do you handle that?
Well, actually, I always said I almost never go on tilt,
Never.
and I can honestly say for like maybe the first 6 or 7 years out of my career, it just I wasn't vulnerable to any kind of tilt. I was simply playing to the best of my abilities. I was always focusing on making the best play. I didn't care much about the outcome of a hand. I was just focusing, is my play the right play? And if it was, then I was happy. And if it was not, then I figured, okay, then I have to do it better next time. And I never looked at my results as a way. And that's usually that's the key to tilt. That 1 or 2 pots you lose big time when you were supposed to win, stuff like that. I never thought in those terms. However, you sent me that question beforehand, and I
Uh-huh.
knew this question was coming, and I thought it's not fair if I say that I never tilted, because once I became a bit more famous, if you will,
Uh-huh. Well known.
I had my head on cover of my face on the cover of magazines, and I did some TV stuff, and people sometimes came to the casino just to watch me play, and I was seated there with just a few chips in front of me, waiting, and it was a lot tougher than it used to be before I was famous, because now it was not just me against the other players, but it was me against the other players with lots of people watching, and sometimes hoping that it would go wrong because they figured, because they said, oh, this Rolf, the things he recommends, it's not proper, or he's just a lucky player, stuff like that, and they wanted to get like positive reinforcement in their views by seeing that things would go wrong.
Sure.
And I really started noticing I was still very good at controlling my emotions, but when before that time I would give myself an A. I think an A is the best, right, in America, or if
Yes, that's good.
as a grade, right?
Very good.
Yeah, yeah, and it was still close to an A, but not the A that it used to be. And basically, if you play like the way I do, it should be an A, because if it's not an A, and you even if you let your emotions influence your decisions somewhat, it costs you a lot of edge.
Yep, that's true. And how about when you were playing at the World Series was there any remarkable hand that you saw one day that you just either you were involved in it or you were at the table and you just couldn't believe it happened? Was there a moment that just took you back and you still remember it's a flashback right now?
Actually, many hands, Al. Uh, mm, the thing I remember the most was like obviously the World Series main event, because everyone was like, I played lots of tournaments, but the main event, obviously, that was where you wanted to perform. And the first years, I thought, despite not being a great tournament player, I've never viewed myself as a great tournament player. The first years that I played the World Series in Las Vegas and I played the main event, I at least the first 2 or 3 days of this of the main event,
Yeah.
I thought, geez, I am the best player by far at the table, and I never experienced that in tournaments,
Wow.
not especially not in tournaments with like large buy-ins,
But
because
this is a big number. Back when you were there, you're
yeah.
talking when it was 7, 8, 9,000 people when it exploded, right?
Yeah, well, obviously, I just played against like 20 or 30 in one tournament,
Sure.
but I was like very happy to see that sometimes it felt as if the other opponents were like playing their cards like face up. I remember one key pot in the first World Series main event, I folded like queens, and on the second main event that I played, I folded kings before the flop, like, and in both cases, I knew very well that I was 100% sure I was right. And nowadays, you cannot imagine folding such a big hand and knowing that you're right, because every player nowadays knows that sometimes he has to make a move with less than aces. But back then, my reading skills were like much better, and some of the opponents weren't playing so well. So I was very proud of those two folds, especially in combination with like sometimes moving my opponents off a hand when I had like absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So it was like if you talk about like playing the players back in those years, I was like really playing the players, and I love that. Of course,